Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. Oh, look, I'm wearing my glasses. Oh, yay. And now I'm taking them off. This is how I start every podcast, Ron. Okay. So before I introduce my guest, this is a heavy episode, but Ron and I were chatting prior to recording when I'm first meeting him. And I can tell I already like him, and he had me at hello. I sometimes just know this about people, and he has this big giant smile, which I love. But I'm going to say this. So my kids are back at school, and my oldest went to high school, which is very hard as a mother. You're like, I know I only have 4 years left with that one, and that's upsetting. And then my youngest is still starting fifth grade, but we went away to like a beach trip with our family in Charleston, South Carolina, which is my favorite city in the whole country. And my mom lived there briefly on Kiowa Island and had a house. And so it's literally, I consider my home, Potomac, Maryland, where I was born. Charleston's kind of my second home. And then I'm an LA girl. I've lived here over 25 years now. But the thing that happened on our trip is something that you hear about, and you're kind of like, when you're in this situation, you go, wait a minute, is this real? Is this really happening right now? And why am I so calm? So let me tell you what happened. I am terrified of the ocean. Since I saw the movie Jaws, I have always hated the ocean. I have always been like a kid. I live in LA at the beach, never go in the ocean, but I love the Atlantic Ocean, and my kids were both surfing. So my husband surfs, my two daughters were surfing, and then a man was kind of on his paddleboard out in the ocean, and he comes out of the ocean very calmly with both my girls were swimming at the time. And he goes, there's a shark in the water. Okay. So to have somebody say to you with your two kids in the ocean, there is a shark in the water, you would think, I was picturing myself as that mom in Jaws that runs out and she's like screaming for her kid. But instead, something came over me, and I am not a calm person. I am a complete spaz, and I do not do well in these situations. But for some reason, I was totally calm. And I said to my kids very calmly, get out of the water now. And then I proceeded to go down the beach with this man on the paddleboard that saw the shark and say, like, get your kids out of the water, get out of the water. There was a shark. I am shocked by my behavior, Ron. And I'm going to just bring you in really quickly before I introduce you. Can you believe that my kids were swimming with sharks? I just never really thought that would happen. It's something you hear in movies.
I have the same fear as you have. After Jaws, I used to dive. I practiced diving, and when I was after I got back from diving in the Caribbean, I took my lessons, and it was great, and I was 80 feet down. But then I saw Jaws, and I refused to go into the water unless I can see clearly what's around me, or just to my chest, and that's it. So I can get out as quickly. But I have the same fear, same thing. But
and the waters are becoming warmer, so these sharks are coming up closer, and you're hearing more and more stories. So I'm sitting there going, "Don't go in the ocean." I let them go back in, but I was not that day. I was pretty terrified, but I was shocked that, to give myself props for a second, because I know I needed it. I just didn't think I would react that way. It was kind of shocking that I was so calm, because I just pictured myself screaming and everyone. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's because it was about your children. It was your children was the most important thing, and you didn't have time to be in yourself and the way you would handle it. You had to focus on making sure they were going to be safe. That's what you were doing.
Without traumatizing them, right?
Without traumatizing them or others around. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So get scared when their parents are upset. They don't know what's going on.
So I think the moral of the story is here. Sometimes we surprise ourselves when we're in these kinds of situations in life. we surprise ourselves. And that is not the reaction by any means that I thought I would have. And I surprised myself. So I think the moral of the story here is like, always know, like, never doubt yourself when you're in these really difficult situations in life. Don't doubt yourself. We're all capable of, being calm and getting through things. And life is just, I say this all the time, it's a series of tests. And we're about to share Ron's story. And he's been through a very hard life. And, when you go through really hard things in life, there's going to continue to be hard things in life, always. But we get through them. And it's how we react to them and how we get through them. And in Ron's case, how he shares his story like he's going to today, because it's a hard one, to help other people and other survivors.
We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
So, Ron Hunter, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I'm going to introduce you right now. Ron is a survivor. Ron is the author of Angel Finally Found His Wings, a true story of finding trust, hope, faith, and the power of love. After being part of the Oprah Winfrey Show's 200 Men Who Survived Sexual Abuse television episode, Ron was inspired to write his memoir. 12 long years later, the book has been published. Ron has been featured in The Guardian and the New York Daily News. He is the son of a Puerto Rican immigrant. Ron is a retired American Airlines flight attendant. He served in the U.S. Army, where he was staff sergeant during Desert Storm in Iraq. He is a lover of life, a survivor of sexual abuse, and a person of profound faith in miracles. Ron resides in Roaring Gap, North Carolina, with his husband, Scott, and has a home in St. Petersburg, Florida. Welcome to my podcast. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Thank you for having me, Meghan. I appreciate this opportunity to share my story and to hopefully have people understand what's going on and what has been going on and continues to go on in his life, and just make a difference. That was the whole point of me writing this, to share my story so that people know they're not alone. But thank you for letting me share with your audience.
Well, I'm honored. I'm beyond honored to have you. And I'm just going to start with a question I ask everybody. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and where you're from. So I gave kind of a backstory, but I would love to go a little bit more into that. I hear an accent there, and I'm guessing it's on the East Coast of the United States.
It is. I'm a Brooklyn boy, very proud Brooklyn boy from Canarsie. That's where I was born. I am the youngest of 22 brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, the oldest living just recently passed away. There were 5 of us left. Now there are 4. And that's, we're getting smaller. But my childhood in the beginning in Canarsie, where I grew up in Brooklyn, was pretty normal as far as I can remember. From 5 years old, it changed at 6. My mother suffered from, unfortunately, schizophrenia. It wasn't officially diagnosed then because they didn't have things to deal with her at that point. And my father was very sick, who suffered from severe asthma, which went into emphysema. And ultimately at 6 years old, I was 6 years old, he passed away. And that changed the dynamics of the family. I had a brother who was in Vietnam at the time. Actually, I had 2 brothers who were in Vietnam at the time. One came back upon my father's death, and he brought Vietnam with him. He brought the psychosis of it with him, and he turned our home into a living hell. not by his willful doing, but by what he had experienced and where he was in his head. He also came back as a heroin addict, somebody who was using drugs, and I guess that helped them get through the traumas that they were experiencing. At that point, there was abuse in the family. I became a prisoner, pretty much of his, accused of horrible things that I did to his friends. Also, there was a sister who is no longer with us, but Mary, who is in the book, who suffered as well. And a lot of her suffering during her capture was because she kept trying to rescue me, and she would get caught in the process. And we became very close ever since that. But from there, the school had gotten word and also saw physical abuse on my brother, who came into the school one day with a black eye. And of course, they're going to ask what happened. Back then, we had counselors in schools, and he told them what happened, that my brother had punched him in the eye. This is a man hitting a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, as my brother was. He's 4 years older.
Do you mind me asking how old he? So, just two quick thoughts on this so far, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Anytime.
Number one, 22 children. My goodness.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
my mom's one of 6, and I'm always like, how did your mom? So 22, I can't even imagine. But then from a young age to lose your dad at 6, I'm very sorry, because that sticks with you. I lost my dad at 13. It sticks with you for your whole life. And then on top of that, just having a family that big, a mother that was schizophrenic. So you have that additional layer, and then the layer of abuse. And as I know you're well aware, but just what veterans come home to and the trauma of what they see at war changes people forever, and their brains are not able to process it. So this is sadly a very common story, of what there's not enough tools out there, especially back then. I feel like there's more and more tools now for helping people post-war, but we have a lot of work to do as a country. Obviously, this is my passion. This is what I talk about every week pretty much, is our issues with helping people that need help mentally. But tell me, go back to they catch your older brother. What was the age difference between him and your 8-year-old brother?
Actually, Tommy, I was 6, so Tommy was 10. He's 4 years older than me. Danny, he was 15 years older. 15 years older than me.
So he was he was young, like a young veteran coming home from war.
He was like 20.
Okay.
Yeah, he went in early.
Okay.
And yeah, so he was already 20 years old, at least at that time. 15, I was 6. Yes, about 21 years old at that time. And that was in 1966, that began with my death of my father. He came back he brought Vietnam back home. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of where we can go from here.
We were talking about, and I'm sorry to interrupt, I just had those couple questions. Your brother, so they had found the bruises and the signs of abuse at school. So tell me about that. So then did the school get involved? That's where we left off.
Yes. The school got involved. They were shocked and horrified at this situation. They had somebody come to investigate. After they spoke with us, the counselors had spoke to each of us, wanting to find out what was going on in the home. We shared with them what was happening on the home, and that's in the book. But that horrified them. They then contacted Child Services from the state, and they came to the house to try and find out what was going on, see the conditions, if what was shared with them was in fact true and that severe. Well, they discovered it was. And one of the things I'll share, which is in the book as well, is when the worker came to the door, introduced himself, who he was, Danny made it very clear to him after he understood what the guy was there for, that I wasn't going anywhere and he wasn't coming anywhere. And he pulled a gun from behind his head, from behind his back. He had his hand on my head behind the door, and the man said, "No problem," and left. That didn't stop what they knew now they needed to do. And they picked me up at school when I was back at school the next day or the day after, and took me away. And that's when I began my journey in the system of orphanages. Foster home first, and then the orphanages. And the first place they took me to, when I was literally handed off to this man who was waiting for me outside, my teacher brought me down. He and I walked to the bus and got on the bus, and I ended up at, it's called Angel Guardian Home, the Angel Guardian Home in New York, Brooklyn. And from there, I was transported to a foster home. From the foster home, I then ended up, and the pieces about each one are in the book. But from there, I was reunited with my brother, who they separated us. And he went directly to the orphanage, where I then joined him about a year later, 9 months to a year later, at Abbott House, which is called Irvington House on the Hudson, but it's Abbott House, which people always say when they hear me say, "Yeah, I grew up in an orphanage." I did. And they go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I say, "Please don't be. That was the best part of my childhood. It was the blessing that happened for me." Yes, and I want them to know that.
Because it helps save you from your brother. And tell me about that, because it's always looked like frowned upon, and people have so many stories. But tell me about your experience with it.
My experience, Abbott House was a pretty new orphanage that was started up in Irvington, New York, on the Hudson, and it allowed me first to be in a safe place. There was no abuse. Mm-hmm. I won't say that I wasn't eating when I was home, but this was a routine that was regular. It was a routine of eating, of bathing, of having clothes, of somebody hugging, being kind and loving to me. Having other kids my age that I could interact with. And we were the poor, Black, Hispanic, it was that mix of kids. But the most important thing was I felt safe, I felt wanted, and I had a home. And I met amazing people came into my life from there. Amazing, that I carried them. They are the ones who I carried with me when all the things were happening to me by other people. I reminded myself constantly how good people are, and what was happening to me was not normal and was not right.
So you say all of these kids, which by the way is so beautiful to talk about, you're a kid in this, so would be looked upon as such a horrible situation. But what's so striking to me is that this was a safe place for you.
Yes.
And but also just to be surrounded by different kids of all different backgrounds, Black, white, you said Hispanic. I'm wondering
absolutely.
if that gave you as a kid, that colors and backgrounds don't really matter. It's about who we are as people. Because I think I talk about this, and I have in the past, I think prejudice in life is not understanding different backgrounds. That's what the definition, if you live or work with somebody of a different background, you tend to drop your guard and understand them, and then lose whatever prejudice you have against them. So I'm assuming that taught you to be genuinely compassionate with people of all different kinds of backgrounds.
Absolutely. I never, first of all, I was fortunate to grow up in Brooklyn, New York, in the projects, and we called them courts. Mm-hmm. You had your building structure. Our court was filled with people who were pretty much in the same boat when it came to economics, education, our position, and we were filled with Jewish, Black, Hispanic, non-Jews, other ethnicities. But the common thing was we were all in the same situation. We were all poor. And we were caring for each other. That was a time when I understood the phrase of "it takes a village," because that was my village. And I was everybody's baby in the courtyard. I couldn't see Mrs. Jenkins and me be doing something wrong, and she wouldn't say, "Ronnie, get off there, or stop that. I'll come over there and take," that kind of thing. So that was wonderful. I mean, Carl's mom and them, I carried them again with me for how it should be, or what was right and what was wrong, not knowing those things, but I was exposed to it. I was exposed to real love and compassion and kindness, and color was not an issue for me. Language was not an issue for me. And then the orphanage provided that again. It was almost like I got the family that I had in my courtyard now at the orphanage. And another big thing was I wasn't very well educated, or poorly educated, I should say, not by the school system's doing, just by my situation and my youth. I was a child, so I was only developed so much. Abbott House gave me that education. They helped me get the structure I needed to begin to learn and to formulate a path for education, to get it in a sense. And that was important for me. And that continued my whole journey, being educated. I sought that out. I asked. I wanted to know. I can't tell you how much I loved Abbott House. And there are people who as I said, I carried them. Chris and Steve Ryman were my counselors in the beginning, and they became my parents. And unfortunately, they passed recently, but I would carry the lessons, the voices of them in my head, in my heart, whenever I had doubt about things or questioning things, to get the right and wrong of it, or to think it. And that saved me in times, and it allowed me not to be changed by what was happening to me, and changed who I was, because I knew that there was better out there. I knew there were wonderful things out there, because Chris and Steve and Jimmy Armstrong and Betsy and Jerry, those were counselors there, showed me that. And they were all different colors and all different ethnicities of counselors. So I knew this was what these people were doing, which wasn't good and safe and healthy. And I knew what I did have. And thank God I had that first, so that I knew that was the best.
So what I love hearing is, because there's always you hear bad experiences about the foster system and all of this stuff. I mean, I don't think that these establishments, there's enough housing, obviously, like that our country has a lot of work to do, like I said, and finding more places like this, because kids need it. Foster children need feel safe. And there's a lot of things that have changed over the years that we need back, because your experience changed you and helped you know that not everybody in the world is evil, because you could have seen it from completely different eyes if you would have stayed in that house with your brother. So I love hearing a story like that, of finding the good in even the hardest things when you're a child and your brain obviously is not even close to being fully formed. So I hate to take a turn about the bad part of the story, but if we go on into like being in this system, what kind of happened next, without going too much into detail and making you uncomfortable?
Sure. Oh, you won't make me uncomfortable. It's important for me to speak this, so that
I want my listeners. Yeah. I want my listeners to know too, that you're listening, that I always try to say you're in a safe space, and I don't ever want to make somebody uncomfortable when I'm asking them questions. So you share what you're comfortable sharing.
Thank you. And you are doing just that. What happened was when I left the orphanage, there were things that took place, stages in the orphanage before I got out. But what happened was my mother was able to be released from the mental institution because all the years when we were gone, she was gone in and out of state institutions. She was given permission to have her children back. And the process went with us being able to first have visits with her that were supervised. Then she would come up to the orphanage and see where we were, the environment we were there. Then we started to get permission to go home for the weekend visits. And then it was the holiday visits. Then it was the summer long week visits. It began like that till finally they decided that she was able to have us, and they gave her thing she had to do was get a home for us, make sure we had our rooms, all those kinds of things to get the authorization to release us from the state to her again. That happened. And that was the beginning of the horror of my life, which was being subjected to an individual, Charlie Acevedo, who is in the book, who procured me on the streets and ultimately forced me into child prostitution. Yeah. And
How old were you at this age? How old were you at this age?
I was 10 when we started to visit home, which is my first introduction to him. How he came about and how he was able to control the station he had in the community was he was a PAL, Police Auxiliary League, athletic league that they had. And he was a coach for them, for the baseball teams, for the neighborhood guys. And then he was also with the basketball coach with the Catholic organizations that they had, the youth Catholic. And then they had the Boy Scouts. And I wanted to be a Boy Scout so bad. And he introduced me to the idea that I could be, but I couldn't do that until I was home and I had to be 11, and then we could think about that. But if that's something I want to do, he would help me do that, facilitate that for me. And he would, do, and that's what he did. And all that information that people knew about him worked in his favor. Trust.
Well, this is what these men do. I mean, they groom young kids, and they go into positions where they're going to be surrounded purposely by children. And I do think as well with your mom's situation, and you can kind of go into this, but I've done numerous interviews about this exact thing. It seems like they look for kids that are good prey that maybe don't have the best home life, or like for you being a child of going to an orphanage, coming home, your mom was in and out of, mental health institutions. Tell me a little bit about that piece of it and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, he was very good. Of course, he did a lot of background research on who we were because we were the new kids on the block. Younger. My brother was, as I said, 4 years older. So by 10, he was 14. My mom was well, but even in all the documentation, which I was able to gather, my sister said, my mom isn't prepared or ready to take care of these kids. It's not the right decision. You need to keep the kids there where they're safe and developing and having a good place, than giving them back to my mom. She can't take care of them. This is wrong. They didn't listen to that because they asked my mom, what do you want to do? And she said, I want my children back. So they gave us. He saw in our visits home on those occasions, found out from the other boys who got to know us, who we were, what our situation was. He found out we were in an orphanage. We were coming on visits and weekends. My mom was, living with my sister at the time before she gave up the apartment for us to have. And she was kind of crazy, the way she'd lean out the windows and look and stare and sing to herself. So he got as much information as that. And then he started to put himself in our space. He'd introduce himself. He'd then share the information about things that were going on that he was doing with the other boys. They'd go on day trips to Mount Bear Mountain on the Dayliner, Circle Liner. They go to the amusement park, Coney Island, things like that. With the Boy Scouts that he shared information about, that where they'd go camping and do these wonderful things, canoeing. It was just all these things he was saying I could also do, but I have to wait until I get home. And to join the Boy Scouts, I would have to be 11 to get my permission to join. And he excited me and all that. And he was so kind to me, thoughtful to me, thoughtful for my mother. He got to meet my mother, and he talked to her in Spanish. We're Spaniards. And that excited her. And he said what he does. She loved that. She thought, oh my God, and he's taking interest in my son. My boy will be safe. I'll have somebody who's in the house. I can't do it, but I'll know when he's out there, somebody is looking after him and keeping him right. And she loved that. And he ingratiated himself. He worked his way.
That's what they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. These predators groom not only the parents, but they also groom all of those around you. And it's very easy, take it from me, to be taken advantage by these people. They're liars. They present themselves as certain kinds of people. They're always very, very charming. This is their purpose for living, I believe, is to groom not only the parent and the child, but also the people around them. That's what they do.
Yes.
And people fall for it every day.
And they unwittingly help him to succeed in what he wanted to do. Because 100%. As long as I was with him, I was safe. Yeah, I was safe. Mm-hmm. I was being taken care of. I looked good. He made sure I was haircuts and clothes and go to school. All this is in the beginning, mind you, until I was able to get me completely away from my mother, who was declining more and more and more, to where she declined so much that it was hard to see. I mean, she'd be in conversations with her imaginary lover. She kissed the wall where she would be in her bed. It was the old plaster wall, so much with the moisture from it that it began to bubble and crumble out of that spot where I guess his lips were for her. It was really bad. And I remember one time, which is the most painful for me, when I came coming from the train up into the house, smelling the food. And I talk about all this in the book. And I go to hug her, and she pushes me away. No, in Spanish, she's saying, no. I don't want to get him upset. I don't want to get him jealous. No, don't do that. And I was like, I can't even touch my mom. And that devastated me. Because I knew now she was gone, because I was her everything, and
the amount of trauma that you went through. I mean, I've been doing these interviews now for 4 years this month, and I've interviewed a lot of people and a lot of really hard things. But when I hear your story, I mean, part of why I do this is so I share your story. And then at the end, I talk about, and you talk about in your book, that there's hope and that you can have a life and you can go on. So it's not just so we are sitting here rehashing these horribly painful memories that are triggering to talk about, but also like giving people hope. Like, you never know if I have a listener somewhere and they're in like a living hell of a situation and they don't know how to get out. So you're a young boy still dealing with this stuff. That memory of your mother pushing you away is obviously a core memory for you, and very hard. The rejection. I have one in my own life that I'll never forget. Same kind of thing. Tell me, like, before we kind of go into the other stuff, like how you were able at such a young age to be, I mean, I guess the answer is you didn't have a choice, which most survivors will say. You don't have a choice. You just keep going. You keep doing it, because what's the alternative? But where did you find your resilience as such a young kid to keep going and dealing with all this stuff?
I can't say that I knew what I was doing. I just was exposed in the early stages to a lot of the goodness, the kindness, I watched people getting up, my friend's father getting up early in the morning and doing the things he had to do to provide. And they didn't give up. And my brothers were pretty good before all the madness happened, and my sisters and everybody, of showing me the strength to go. In spite of our situations, we keep going. We keep going. So I guess that was there. But also to deal with what I had was I had a good foundation from my experience from my foster parents, from my foster family, who showed me the relationship that she had with her two daughters and the father of the place, and how he provided and how he did the things. So I saw them. And then when I got to the orphanage, the people I shared, the counselors who I had in my life showed me. I mean, I witnessed, I could see, and I could hear their voices in my head when things were happening to me. And I was able to make a difference and make a choice of how I was going to go, right or wrong. Now, I will tell you this. I went this way. My brother went the other way. My brother became bitter, angry, uncontrollable in terms of he refused to let anybody control him anymore. No rules, no boundaries. He ended up living on the street and dying on the street, from drug addiction. He was a womanizer. He was so hurt by everything. And he couldn't let it go. He resented everybody. Yeah. Everybody betrayed him. So he had no ability to trust anybody. And it killed him.
Do you think I mean, this is what can happen. I mean, it's such a common story. So when I meet somebody like you, that's why I asked that question of, is it, obviously it's the foster situation, which was a great situation, and the orphanage, which is a great situation. And I love that you had that. But also I wonder too, is it like, as a boy being like, someday, did you ever have any some days in your head in the worst times of your life, in the abuse and all of the things? Like for me, I grew up with a mentally abusive stepfather. He was a monster. I would say, and my dad died at 13, and my listeners all know this, but I would say I would escape into characters because I was an actress and a singer and a dancer from a young age. And I would say to myself, someday, in the worst, most painful times in that house, someday I'm going to get out. Someday I'm going to drive my car to Los Angeles. Someday I'm going to do this. Yeah. It was always like the hopes of... Was that you? I wondered that.
I kept my faith, my belief, my hope in that. I learned later in life, this too shall pass. I just have to keep going and wait for the opportunity. I kept the possibility of that happening, the dream of that happening for me. I just had to get to the other side of it. I had to get past this. And it was my hope and belief in that. And I didn't want to ever lose faith in goodness or good people because of all the bad that was happening, because I already witnessed it. I was more blessed than my brother because I was young enough to have more of an impact from the good things that happened to me than the bad. My brother was 4 years older, much more developed, so he was able to hold on to the negative, the horrible things. And what's more horrible than being rejected and abused by your own family and tossed away? He could process that. I processed it the other way, that, wow, we're going into this place and they're so kind to me and loving. His was a total opposite from me, and I hated that for him because he was a wonderful person. He was my protector. He was my hero, even though we were set against each other by my brother Danny. And again, that's in the book. But I had hope, and I kept the hope. And I'll tell you this, when it came to the day that I stopped believing that this was going to change was the day I tried to commit suicide. And I said, if this is my life, I don't want this. And if this is going to be it, I'm going to change it. I'm going to get out of this. If this is not it, And I did. And I tried to commit suicide and I was almost successful. I was in a coma for days in ICU and they pumped me and I didn't release any of the pills until I was asked if I would give James, who was in the book, he leaned over to me and said, give me a chance. And I looked at him and he was tearing and I was tearing with him. And I said, okay. And I leaned over my bed and threw up and pills were coming out of me still. After they should have been dissolved. The doctor said, this is a miracle. This is a miracle. How can he still have parts of pills undissolved in his system? So, and that began the process of me, the journey and the planning with James to get me out of my situation.
Okay,
And
so
it took
who
a
is
lot of
like
time.
without giving the book away, obviously. But we kind of skipped ahead. So you got to and I don't want to go into the horrible abuse and all of that stuff, but then what age was that where you kind of were at the lowest point of your life and had a suicide attempt? And who was James?
Okay.
Was he a friend? Who was he?
No, James was a pedophile. I met
James
him
was the pedophile
while I was working on the street as a child prostitute. Charlie had put me out on the street after manipulating and showing me and teaching me and raping me and doing all these things and blackmailing me and threatening me. And so under his control, he had me working the streets of Times Square, 42nd Street. And it was at that time that James had been witnessing me on there and said, "There's something wrong here. This kid doesn't look like." But I see him, and anyway, he decided to make contact with me, and it turned out he ended up loving me, and wanting to help me when he asked me to trust him. And there's a whole thing, and it's in the book. But ultimately,
I won't go into those details, but I just, go ahead.
He decided that he wanted to help me escape.
Okay. So he was a pedophile himself, not obviously a great person, but again, did the right thing and helped you escape. And then you found yourself in that horrible situation. But again, I hate to say age ranges, but it makes sense to my listeners. What age was that you were at that point?
Okay. At that point, I was on the street starting at, I would say, the official beginning of my prostitution, selling myself, was about 12, even though I was being sexually abused at 11. By Charlie. I was put out on the street to work the street and sell myself at 12 all the way to 17, when I was finally able, with the assistance of James, to escape. And it was a whole thing. When I finally told him the truth of what was happening, why I was out on the street, why I was doing what I was doing, where was I living? Who was taking care of me? And I finally let him in. And he was devastated and remorseful about everything, but at the same time, he said, if you allow me, I want to help you. I want to get you out of this. But we have to come up with a plan. And that's when he came up with the plan and we implemented that plan. And it worked. It worked.
And so you were able to get out?
With his assistance, yes. It cost him quite a bit. It cost him financially. It cost him professionally. And there was, in the book, they talk about a federal case that was happening. They were breaking up, investigating a child prostitution ring with drug ring. And the agents who had come to the house that I was staying with. And that's when it really hit the fan then. I've got so much happening here in my head that I'm trying to keep it.
Yeah. I don't want to like go there, but like the whole point of you sharing that story and going into like, I mean, that's one of the most horrific stories I've ever heard in my life. But just that somebody that obviously didn't have such a clean background was able to like help you, get you out, give you a start. Yes. And then your life kind of began again, right? Like once you decided like you were willing to like go on, because you've gone on to like have such an impressive life of serving in the, I believe that was it the Air Force, the Army, go into that piece of it. Cause that's okay. So, cause that's also like you served in Iraq. So you're putting yourself into another situation. You're there to help our country. Thank you so much for your service. But now you're getting yourself back into another like very horrific situation. So it's just like thing after thing. But tell me, like, because you picked yourself up to have such an impressive career and life. And like, I hate to say this, but like, look at you now, Ron. Like, you're amazing. You deserve it. You deserve it.
I'm very blessed.
You really do.
And that's where my faith is. That's why I know I talk about faith. And it's how you process that and you believe. And I believe that light, that flame was lit by the people early in my life who showed me the love, the kindness, all of that.
Yeah. Can we talk about the faith piece? Because I'm a person of faith. I talk a lot about my faith saving my life. Yes. I was also suicidal. I also, I can relate to some, like, I can't even, you've gone through such a horrific amount of pain in your life. But I do believe, and I talk about this a lot, that even in like the most difficult times that you found yourself in, like what age did you really, like how did faith come into your life? Can you talk about that?
Sure. My parents were Roman Catholics, very religious, made sure we would be poor. But my dad, and I learned this from my family who helped me gather the information from the years that I didn't have knowledge of. They would always have money to put into that little basket, for them, each of the children. And religion played a big part for us in terms of the way he was raising the girls. He was very strict with the girls, all those things that go along with a very religious parent who lead and guide and show. So I was aware of that. And I believed in God because I saw how much it meant to my parents too, who were the example for me of it. And I remember to this day, and I remember sharing it with my spouse, Scott, I always talk about it's kind of dates you, but remember the velvet pictures you have, and it would be a velvet, and it was black velvet, and it was in gold, and the colors on it, and it was the Last Supper. And it was,
Ron, I don't know if you know this, but I'm only 28, so I don't remember those at all. No, I don't. Okay. I'm kidding. Right. I'm kidding, but I don't really remember them. But I kind of know what you're talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and so I always remember that, and that was over our dining behind the chair of the dining room table, and it was this black velvet painting. I would say because that's what I would look at it as, but it was a picture of the Last Supper. Black velvet, the colors of the robes and stuff, and the gold. And I always looked at that, and I would see the relationship and the importance it played in the family. And when we did our meals, and I saw my mom pray, and I saw the rosary, so I knew it had strength and it power because it was important to my mom and dad. And so I kept that because I knew that it seemed to be something that they had faith in. So I continued. The other thing that I used was when I was taken away, the place I was taken to was called the Angel Guardian Home. And it was run by nuns. And I know you hear the horror stories of the nuns, how mean they could be or how physical they can get with you in their ruler or whatever they want to. Well, the nun that took me in and received me from that social worker who handed me over to her, she was just wonderful to me. She was so kind. Again, the kindness. She knew I was frightened. She knew I was scared. She knew what the traumas were I was going to. And she loved me. She was kind. She spoke softly and warmly to me. There was compassion, as I can understand it as a kid. You know, I know what it is now, but I just knew she was nice, you know, and what happened with talks in the book, I had a habit of when traumas are going on or nervousness or things that I can wet the bed, you know, because of things that happen. And I was so afraid that I would, and I did at the Angel Guardian Home. And it's in the book too, how it was handled. But it was, again, kindness, lovingness, you know, tenderness. And then I was sent away from there to the foster home. And that continued. I was exposed to those things over and over. And I have to believe that was the faith that I had and the belief I had that these were happening because of that. I was being led and guided and shown. And then I would have to make a decision of which of the two I would choose. And I chose to follow my faith and believe in that. That was more powerful and more important to me. And the thing I will say is my name, Angel Finally Found His Wings, was the name I chose because I connected all the good aspects of my life, all the good situations in my life to Angel. And that's the name I used on the street because it helped wrap me kind of in a blanket of protection. I mean, angels, you know, and they're protected. They're part of the goodness of the world. And so that was my name I chose. It was where I was taken to, Angel Guardian Home. The nuns that were around me, the good people and the kindness. Yeah. And even on the street. And again, it's in the book. I had a relationship with a nun who was Sisters of Charity, I think they were called. And she would sit on 42nd Street at the top of the steps of I believe it was this 3 train or 7 train. And as you come up out onto the street of 42nd Street, she'd be there on a chair with a little table and a basket out for people to put money in, you know. And she was sitting there in her black and white, her habit and all. And when I'd come up, I knew she was there. So I would feel joy. I feel I was now safe again. Nothing had happened to me on this outing. And I took money. And I'd always prepared as I was coming up the steps to put into her, kind of giving what I knew now is tithings. And it was saying, thank you for letting nothing happen to me. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for letting me be safe. And this is what I can do. So I would always put money in and she would look at me. And I don't know if she knew what was happening on the street, but I don't see how she couldn't suspect things. But what could she do at that point? I mean, so that was another way of my connection and saying thank you for watching over me. And it just kept me because I was safe. I knew all these horrible things were happening, but I knew it wasn't the best of life happening for me. I knew things were going to, they had to change. They had to. And I had to believe that. I chose to believe that.
And keeping that faith piece of it and this beautiful story about the angel, like, you know, I know we're kind of short on time, but I'm going to tell you this and my listeners this story. I was like surfing the internet and, you know, I've gone through a lot of loss in my life like you have as well. And there was this woman, and she was visiting, she had lost her son and he had died, and she put this windmill down, like a little, one of those little, like, you know what I'm talking about? You stick them in the
I
ground and they
do.
spin with the wind.
Yes,
And
yes.
she put this little, like, kind of windmill down in front of his grave. And it was her son who has passed away's birthday, and she was singing happy birthday. And then all of a sudden, like, no wind around, nothing was around, nothing. And the windmill started going really, really fast. So she knew that was her son saying, I'm still here. And like what struck me about that. And then she said, well, stop it now. If you can stop it, can you stop it? Because I miss you so much. And the wheel, like the thing stopped, and there was no way, like, that was rigged. There was no way, but it's just an example. And I wanted to say that because I just saw that the other day of, like, in our most difficult times. I mean, you've been to hell and back like a million times over. The fact that you saw, like, light in, like, your darkest times, whether it be like in nuns, which you said they have such a bad name. I went to Catholic school my whole life. I had nothing but amazing experiences with the Sisters of Visitation where I went to high school. And one of them, I'll never forget something she said to me, and it has stayed with me for my whole life. So there's good people everywhere. And so out of this story, I hope that people listen to this. And if you are struggling and you are in your darkest times, that you listen to Ronald's story and you realize that, like, find that there's hope, even in the smallest things. And if Ronald has the ability to, like, keep going and then, like, you know, serve at war, in a horrific war, and then pick yourself up, you know, and I'm saying this, I'm not going to finish your whole story, but then you flew for the airlines and, you know, were a flight attendant, and now you're, like, married and, you know, living your life and sharing your story to help so many people. And it's so, so important. So what are your thoughts on that? I know I'm finishing this story. I'm not trying to be a big mouth.
No, it's okay. My whole point in telling this was to give those who might still be suffering or have suffered and have not made the transition from being victimized and are living in the victim state, to see that we were victimized. We're not victims unless we continue to allow those people who did those things to us to have power over us. And the way we get rid of that power is by talking about it, by pushing past it and saying, I'm not going to let you control me, because as long as I stay here, you still have that power over me. I want to have a life. I know I can have a life, but I have to do the work to that's going to help me get to what I want. And too many people invested in me. Too many people believed in me when I didn't, when I stopped, and when I was lost. And I went through the ups and downs, especially after James passed away. And I'll just say that my life went to hell again. I'll leave that at that. But my whole point in this is there is hope. You can't give up trust. There are people who are deserving of having that because they are sincere, genuine, and do care. And I know that for a fact. And you can't dismiss them because of what other people did. You know, don't associate those actions and behaviors to them. Give them that chance, because you can always pull away if you see that. You have the red flags. You know what the hairs stick up on you when you feel it. So I want them to know we're not victims. We were victimized. But even more than being a survivor, that's great that you're a survivor. It means you've taken some action and you've found some power. But then you can actually live fully and completely and have and experience all the things that people say you can't have, having experienced the things that I and others who have gone through these things would ever have, because they were broken. They were soiled. They couldn't recover from it. Well, you can, and you will have those things if you want it. And if you trust, keep your faith and keep the hope that that person is there for you.
I mean, something that I also wanted to say is, and I just have two more quick questions, but
Sure.
I just keep striking me in my head that it's like the part about angels is like there's angels walking amongst us, which is like something
Absolutely.
people say all the time. And I
It's true.
wonder, like, I want people to really think about that because there are. And when you don't feel like there are and you're really struggling, you have to remember that. And your story really inspires me and makes me think about that stuff.
I think I know I was being watched over. I know I had my angel guardian that was there looking for me. There are situations that I talk about in the book, the ones that I do. That was my guardian angel protecting me, helping me to get out of the situations, keeping the pills intact and not dissolving in me and making me die from it, pulling me from a bad situation and don't know who it was that did it, but they did, and it saved my life. Bringing those people into my life that did come in and allowed me to have examples of the good, the kind, the loving, the caring. And that's what I mean. And nobody can define you. Only you can define you. And with my experiences, and I love Maya Angelou. And one of the things that hit me, and it was younger when I heard it, but it made sense to me. Because always people say, how did you turn out the way you did? How everything that happened, why? How? And I remember hearing her say, when you know better, you do better. And I knew how bad things were and what was done to me. And the idea of this being done to another human being was enough. But to be done to another human being by me, by continuing this abusiveness, this, keeping it going, by me becoming an abuser because it happened to me, that wasn't acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew better. So I was going to do better. And I, I'm going to define me.
And you
can't
are.
define.
Yeah, you are, and you have. Let me ask you this in closing, like my last question, because I know there's so much more, and that's why I want people to go out and read the book. I know I'm going to, but I want to know about today, because I love your big giant smile, and it's nice to see you smile after everything you've gone through, because you're just such an inspiration. Tell me about, is that your partner's name, Scott?
That's my husband. Yes, he is. He's
your husband. Okay. How long have you guys been together?
25 years, September 9th, 1999, we met, and we'll celebrate our 25th year together. We haven't been apart since the day we met. And we've been married,
at work?
Officially legally married. Excuse me?
Did you meet at work? How did you meet?
Oh, no, I met, again, the life path that I joined the airline. And in my airline, when I left the academy, I went to San Francisco where I was based. Now, again, this is weird. I'll try as fast as I can. That base hadn't opened in years to new people coming in. And when I told them where I wanted to be based, they said, that's not going to happen. You have to be like 20 years to get based there. San Francisco at that time. And so I said, well, I'm going to put it in anyway. If I'm not, I'll have a second choice. It came open on the day I was going to be graduating. And I was senior in my class by age. And I got to go to San Francisco. Voila. That is something that happened for me. In that, we went out with the roommates I had, who were all female, except for me. And we went out to go karaoke in San Francisco in the Castro district.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was there that when they were on trips, because we would take different trips and we were on different schedules and we were new. I was by myself one time at the apartment. And I said, I'm going to go out and, check out the town, go to Castro, and I did. And I met my spouse at this video bar. And it's a whole way that we met too. But it was amazing. It was, again, here are the angels making things happen for me and blessing me to today. We have traveled all over the country, now we're traveling all over the country, but we've traveled all over the world. And I remember when he asked me, he says, how would you like to see the world with me? And we see it together. And I went, sure, I'd love to go. That's why I joined the airlines and I'm traveling all. He said, no. And what he meant was for us to have a life and travel and do that, because he knew I obviously loved traveling. But yeah, he's given me an amazing life. Everything I believed, hoped, and prayed for is happening and has happened to me, is happening. He's my best friend. He's the one when good, bad, ugly is happening is I turn to. And I will say this. The three most important men in my life was my father. In the book, you'll see the journey I had with him and what happened. James, who rescued me, gave me a life so that I could get to the person who is in my life today. And it's because of all those things that I got to where I am and keeping my faith and my belief and my trust and my hope alive in me and having those people in my life that I have this smile on my face. I have I have the gift of joy, of happiness, and of love. And that's important to me. And I want others to have it. And I want them to know it is not a wishful think or it's possible. No, it's more than possible. It will happen. And I'm an example of it happening. And I want everybody to feel what I feel and have what I have.
Well, honestly, like I could talk to you for forever. Your story is such an inspiration. You're such a wonderful human. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking to me. I'll say in closing really quickly that going through my life, my own life, I see a parallel with meeting my own husband. We've been together 23 years and he's my rock. He helped save me in my darkest times. And he's stuck with me all these years. He drives me freaking bananas and we're complete opposites. But I just sometimes think, if there's one thing that happened to me in my life that was I'm just so extremely grateful for, it's obviously my two children, that's one, but my husband and I drive him, we drive each other crazy, but I just, I love him so much. And just to be gifted this is an example you of knowing as hard as things can be sometimes, that I always will have my faith. And I'm always just so lucky, you're talking about, just to have that one person. And I think I don't tell him enough. And if he's listening to this, I hope he knows that. So in closing, can you tell everybody where they can find you and where they can get your book? Can you tell them that real quick?
Absolutely. First of all, it's available on Amazon.com and on Barnes & Noble, on books. It's online. You can buy it. It's in hard copy. It's hardback. It's a paperback. It's also an audiobook now. I just finished the audiobook. It's on Kindle. On Kindle as well. I'm sorry. I also have a website. It's angelfinallyfoundhiswings.com. And on Facebook, it's Angel Finally Found His Wings. And of course, you can look for me on Ronald Hunter. So
Ronald Hunter on Instagram. Are you on Instagram?
Instagram, yes, I am. And on the different sites, yes.
All the different platforms.
And if you reach out to me and it's in relation to this, give me a way of me knowing that so that I can go and talk about that with you, and I'll respond back with you and answer whatever you have. Again, I wrote a book about it, so there's nothing I won't talk about, but I'm not going to initiate things because I don't know who I can trigger with things. So I will never do that. I'm not a therapist, but I will share what I have and I've experienced, and my hope, trust, and love for you, and hope that I can help and get you to where you need to go. So thank you, Meghan. I really appreciate the time you've given me.
Thank you so much, Ronald. It's just been an honor to talk to you today. Everyone, if this is not a story of resilience and the power that we all have to go on, I honestly don't know what is. I hope that if you're struggling, you always know that there's hope and there's help out there. So as I close every podcast, keep going. You matter. Your story matters. Thanks, Ron.
Yes. Thank you, Meghan. God bless.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.